Good morning, everybody. My name's Heather Stapleton. I'm here at Duke University, and I'm the lead researcher for the North Carolina Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study. Really appreciate you being here this morning. Our goal for the next 20 to 25 minutes is to kind of walk you through and help you understand your PFAS test results. Now, let me just take a minute to kind of give an overview of this morning's discussion, just so you know what to expect. We're going to start with just like a quick 1 to 2 minute overview of the North Carolina Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study and just talk a little bit about goals and objectives and timelines. And then we'll pivot and talk about PFAS. What are PFAS? What kind of products contain PFAS? Why should firefighters care about exposure to PFAS? What's unique to firefighter or the occupation of firefighting? And then we'll also talk about issues that are unique to North Carolina when it comes to PFAS. And then we're going to jump into your PFAS report so that I would recommend that if you have it handy, you kind of pull it out so we can walk through it as we go along. And then as Eve indicated, we're going to have a question and answer period at the end, and we'll take as much time as we can to answer all of your questions. So first, let me start by saying thank you. Thank you for being part of the North Carolina Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study. This is a research study that is funded by the North Carolina Collaboratory, which is a program that receives support from the North Carolina legislature. So this is all funded by taxpayer dollars in North Carolina. Our goal in this study is to help firefighters here in North Carolina engage with the National Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study. In addition to that, we have been asked to help support PFAS exposure assessments within firefighters in North Carolina. So our goal is to recruit 1,000 firefighters across the state of North Carolina, both career and volunteer firefighters, to help understand PFAS exposures in the state and share those results back with firefighters. In addition, we have a goal of addressing research questions that may be specific to North Carolina Fire Service members and partnering with the North Carolina firefighters to help develop strategies to reduce your exposure to hazardous chemicals, because we all want firefighters to live long, healthy lives that are free of cancer. So let's just start with a quick overview of what PFAS are. PFAS is an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. I realize that is a mouthful, and that's why we use the term PFAS. This is a class of chemicals. It's actually a class of over thousands of chemicals. We don't have an exact number because some of these are used in a proprietary sense. They are man-made synthetic chemicals that have been used since World War II in a number of different applications. Their properties confer both water and oil repellent properties, so they have a lot of uses with that regard. And they're found in a variety of products, both consumer products and building materials. If you look at this figure on the right, you'll see a number of images. These are images of products that can contain PFAS. So for example, if we start on the top, you see stain-resistant products. So you can think of your carpets, your upholstery, and your sofa, potentially your upholstery and your vehicles. They can be treated with these PFAS chemistries to provide these stain-repellent properties. Going around the circle, you see things firefighting foam, right? AFFF, that has historically contained PFAS. Microwave popcorn bags, it's the lining of those bags that provide the oil repellency. And then as you go around, you'll see things like cosmetics, pizza boxes, paints, sealants, and varnishes. Some with indoor and outdoor paints and sealants can contain PFAS. Cleaning products, dental floss, some, not all, dental floss are made from fluoropolymers, which can contain PFAS. Non-stick cookware, think of things like your Teflon pans, water-resistant clothing, other additional personal care products, and even things like pesticides. As is, all of these and others can contain PFAS. They're used in a variety of different products. And over time, those chemicals can be emitted from these products and leach into the air, the water, and the soil. And we know that unfortunately, most people living in the US do have PFAS in our bodies. It's detected in 99% of blood samples collected from individuals living in the US. So it's not uncommon to have PFAS in our bodies, and they can stay there for long periods of time because they're very thermal and chemically stable, right? So the question everyone wants to ask is, how much do you have in your body? How high is your exposure? Because that's what's going to relate to any potential health risks. Now, PFAS are also unique to the fire service. As I just mentioned, they have been historically used in the aqueous film-forming foams, or AFFF, particularly those Class B firefighting foams. But they're also have been used in turnout gear or your bunker gear, particularly the outer shell that has that durable water repellent finish. PFAS have been applied to provide that durable water repellent finish and some flame resistant properties. However, due to concerns about potential exposure and health risks due to PFAS, there has been a big pivot, as many of you may know. Starting a few years ago, manufacturers started producing textiles that are not treated with PFAS. And some states have now passed legislation that will prohibit fire departments from purchasing turnout gear that is manufactured with PFAS starting next year. That's not the case here in North Carolina. It is the case in a few other states. So there's been a big transition in the use of PFAS in turnout gear. And I will point out that my colleague, Dr. Brian Orman at NC State University, and I have been kind of looking into this a little bit more to understand these trade-offs. We hope to have more information on that down the line. Right. In addition to those other sources, there are some unique sources here in North Carolina. Unfortunately, there are some groundwater and surface waters, drinking water sources that have been contaminated with PFAS. This is particularly true in the Cape Fear River Basin, which is highlighted in green on the map here of North Carolina on the right. There are two primary point sources of PFAS to the Cape Fear River. One is the textile industries located up in the Burlington, North Carolina area. They manufacture textiles that have this stain and water repellent features to them, and they have been found to be releasing some of these PFAS through their wastewater that has ended up into the Haw River, and the Haw River flows into the Cape Fear River. The state has been working with those industries to kind of reduce their emissions of those chemicals into the river. So that's ongoing. In addition, there's the Fayetteville Works plant outside Fayetteville, North Carolina. This is a PFAS chemical manufacturing facility. And prior to 2017, they did actually discharge some PFAS through their wastewater into the Cape Fear River, which did contaminate some drinking water sources downstream. So this is another reason why there's been a lot of tension on PFAS here in North Carolina, to understand exposures and contamination of drinking water sources across the state. So within the North Carolina Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study, we have now been enrolling participants for almost 10 months now. And in that 10 months, we have recruited 444 firefighters into the study. Thank you again. Of those 444, we have PFAS results from 249 firefighters. We are continuing to analyze samples every month. We do these in batches and then release data back to the firefighters. And each firefighter should receive an individual report for your PFAS measurements that we're going to be discussing here shortly. Before jumping into these reports, I wanted to kind of mention some of the resources we use to help interpret your measurements. Right, so we can make a measurement for these chemicals in your blood, but we need to know what that measurement means. How do we interpret this? Is this high? Is this low? Or does this look like other people in the United States? To do that, we rely on data that's generated from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, or what we call NHANES. So you'll hear me use this term NHANES as I walk through your report. NHANES is a project funded by the CDC. It is basically the US biomonitoring program. Every couple of years, this program actually has a mobile health unit that visits different locations across the state to voluntarily enroll people into the study that assesses general health trends and collects biological samples like blood, which are analyzed for a variety of different chemical contaminants, including PFAS. So since 1999, NHANES has been monitoring PFAS in the US population and looking at trends over time. So if you look at this figure on the right, what it's showing you is general levels of PFAS in the US population from 1999 to 2018 for 5 different PFAS. So each line in this graph represents a different PFAS. So for example, you see this, the most abundant one is PFOS, which we refer to as PFAS. And the data does suggest that the concentrations on average have been decreasing, over this 20-year time span in the US population. So when we get to your results, what we've been doing is comparing your results to the levels and measurements in this NHANES program using data from 2018, which just was 7 years ago. So we just have to understand that's a potential limitation. When the COVID pandemic hit, they had to stop collecting and analyzing samples. They did pick up again after the pandemic, but with everything going on right now, it's not clear if they're going to be able to continue with this program. So all the data that we're going to be talking about today is comparing back to the NHANES measurements from 2018. So now we're going to jump into your report back. So if you do have it handy, please do pull it up. The report should start with a letter that looks like this. It says, "Thank you for participating in the Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study, FFCCS." You'll recognize this is a different logo than our logo. Again, we are partnering with the National Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study. This is their logo, and we're all using the same documents and resources. So that's why that logo might look a little bit different, but your report will start off with this letter. If you move to Table 1 in your report, Table 1 lists all the PFAS that we are measured and reporting back to you in this report. There are 19 PFAS listed in this table. On the column on the left, that is the full long chemical name for each PFAS. So each row is a different PFAS. They're very hard to say. I even have trouble saying them. That's why we use these acronyms or abbreviations in the column on the right. You'll notice that some of these are highlighted in red font. That's because these are the 7 PFAS in which we have more knowledge and understanding of their health risks. So we are referring to these PFAS that are highlighted in red as the NASEM 7, and we're going to come back to that term as well. NASEM is an acronym for the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. This is one of the premier scientific bodies in the United States. Several years ago, they conferred a committee of experts that have a lot of knowledge on PFAS to review the state of the science on PFAS, particularly in terms of what we know about their toxicity and health risks. And so NASEM did release a report with some guidance on how to interpret your blood measurements and what you should do and how you should talk to your doctor about your blood measurements. And so we're going to walk through that as well today. So your data and your results are going to be found in Table 2. So if you have the ability to look through and pull up Table 2, again, each row is a different PFAS, and you see the name of the PFAS in the column all the way to the left. Your individual results from your blood measurement are reported in the second column that's highlighted here in green. It's labeled Your Results. So you can go down and you see these are your measurements reported in units of nanograms per mil. And I know that's a very abstract, kind of vague unit. A nanogram per mil is the same as a parts per billion. So you can just think about these measurements as parts per billion. And that in itself is a very small unit of measurement. I like to compare a part per billion to a drop of water in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So it is a very small concentration, and we do have the ability to measure them at this low level. But as you go down, this is an example report. You can see that some of these PFAS have measurements. You can see the top row says 0.83. So that would be 0.83 parts per billion measured for PFOA. And then if you move down the screen, you can see some say less than LOD. LOD is an acronym for limit of detection. So if the value says less than LOD, that just means the measurement in your blood was too low for us to measure with our capabilities. So it's below the detection limit of our instrumentation or our analytical instruments. So that just means it wasn't measured in that value or in your sample. Now there are additional columns in Table 2. If we move to then the third column here in Table 2, highlighted here in orange, these are the values from that NHANES database that I mentioned previously, right? And this represents the 50th percentile or the middle level measured in the US population in that 2017-2018 cycle of NHANES. And this provides you something to compare your measurements to, right? If you are below this level, that means you're similar to other people. The 50th percentile means half the people have levels lower than this in the population, and half the people have levels higher than this, right? So you can see if you fall below or above the 50th percentile. The third column is also from NHANES. That is not your measurement, right? This is the 95th percentile in NHANES. So it gives you a sense of how high some people are in the US population. So these values in this column are the values in which 95% of the US population has a value below this level. Only 5% of the US population has a measurement above this level. So this also gives you another benchmark to compare your measurement to kind of interpret, is this high or is this low, and how do I compare to other people in the US? Okay. We also, if you go through your report, there are some visuals. So the last few pages of the report is basically taking the same data presented in that table, but putting it into a visual format that might be easier to interpret. So each PFAS has one of these figures here. We call these strip charts. This is just an example for the first PFAS, PFOA or PFOA. So you can see that there are units from here from 0 to 6 nanograms per mil. If you look at your report, the green diamond represents your measurement from your blood sample, and the orange square represents that NHANES value for the 50th percentile, that median level. So you can see how you visually compare on this chart. And the blue diamond represents the 95th percentile, again, that upper part of the distribution found in the US population. So this visual helps you kind of see where you fall visually, as opposed to just looking at a number in a table. So just an additional way to interpret your values compared to what's seen in the population. Now, what does all this mean? So you have your measurement, you can see if you're high or low compared to other people in the US population, but what you probably want to know is, does this put me at risk for any health conditions? So this is where we're going to fall back to the information provided in the NASEM report, that National Academies report. If you go back to table 2, the very last row in table 2 is labeled total PFAS, and then you'll see NASEM in parentheses. This is not the total PFAS for every single PFAS we measured. It's not all the sum of all 19. This is the sum of those 7 PFAS, which we know have some risks for health effects. So we have summed those 7 for you at this bottom row. So what we recommend is looking at this value as we kind of move to the next few slides to help interpret what this means. Now, I'll point out, we don't clearly know, there's not enough information to know what level is actually safe for PFAS. But we do have some recommendations that if you're at a certain threshold, then you should be talking to your doctor about potentially being screened for certain health conditions. So I would encourage everyone to find that value in your report. Again, it's the bottom row where it says total PFAS, and it's in that second column highlighted here. So you take that value. In this example here, we see 6.61. If we move to this next slide, here what you want to do is take your value and see which of these bins you fall into. Are you less than 20? Are you between 2 and 20? Or are you greater than 20? Now, in that previous example report, we had a total of 6.61, which puts us into the middle bin. Most people in the US fall into this middle bin to have a sum of between 2 and 20. And you can see what the guidance was from the NASEM: getting your cholesterol checked every 4 to 6 years, getting screened for high blood pressure, particularly if you're pregnant, screening for breast cancer based on clinical guidelines. It is important to note that these are guidelines that are standard healthcare. So if you're seeing your doctor on a regular basis, these are likely tests they're going to perform anyway. They're just standard of care. The concern is if you have a PFAS sum greater than 20 nanograms per mil or parts per billion. Some studies suggest that having higher PFAS above this threshold puts individuals at a greater risk for certain health complications. So if you do have a sum greater than 20, you would definitely want to get your cholesterol checked. We have seen, actually even here in North Carolina, that people that do have higher exposure to PFAS are more likely to have high cholesterol, which puts you at risks for other diseases, cardiovascular diseases in particular. It's also important to talk to your doctor about making sure you're getting your blood pressure tested. Asking or requesting for a thyroid function test is also important. PFAS have been shown to interfere with the function of our thyroid glands, which are located in our neck. It's also important to talk to your doctor about potentially having a urinalysis done to look for kidney cancer, and then also talking about screenings for testicular cancer, breast cancer, and ulcerative colitis. Those are 3 diseases that have been observed in individuals, are higher risks for these in individuals with higher PFAS. Now, of the 249 firefighters which have received their PFAS results, Only 4%, so a very small number, have been above this 20 nanograms per mil. So by and large, most people are falling into these categories where it's just standard care. So I don't want anyone to be alarmed here. We do have this, as I said, this, as Eve mentioned, this recording will be shared, but we also have some fact sheets with this information that are available on our website. Now, I also just want to take a minute to kind of tell you what we're learning about PFAS exposure in firefighters here in North Carolina. So what I've done here is plotted the average levels in the firefighters from North Carolina, these 249 individuals, for those 7 primary PFAS, and put this in comparison to data from the NHANES, right, from the US population. So the red bars represent the average levels in North Carolina firefighters, and the black bars represent average levels in the US population. And what you can see for each of these PFAS that are plotted is, in general, the red bar is lower than the black bars. So we do seem to be lower, and some of that could be just because levels are declining over time. Again, this is a comparison back to data collected in 2018, but it does suggest that they are lower. The one exception is PFHXS here in the middle. This one PFAS seems to be a little bit higher than what's been reported in NHANES. However, as I said before, it's important to think about comparisons when they're collected in the same year. It could be that people in the US population are also increasing in their exposure to PFHXS. We hope to explore this in the future by comparing some of our data with ongoing studies at NC State University, where they are actually recruiting individuals in the general population in the Wilmington and New Hanover County to understand exposures in that area. So we'll be able to compare our data with their data very shortly to see, does this seem higher in firefighters or does it seem pretty typical for people in North Carolina? So hopefully stay tuned. So we're almost through these slides and we're going to open up for questions, but I really want to point out that I hope this information has been helpful to you, but I really want to stress and keep in mind that having PFAS in your blood does not mean you'll get sick. It doesn't mean you're going to get cancer. I have PFAS in my blood as well. I've measured my own levels. There are multiple factors that influence our risk for disease, right? Just like not everyone that smokes is going to get lung cancer, not everyone that has PFAS in your blood is going to get one of these diseases. What's important is to reduce your exposure where you can, take steps to mitigate that, and continue to meet with your doctor and have your annual exams. If you do have some questions about how you can reduce your PFAS exposure, as I said previously, we do know that drinking water can be contaminated with PFAS in this area. There's a lot of efforts to understand how this varies spatially across the state. If you are on a public water supply, you can reach out to your water utility. Most of them have been monitoring for PFAS, so they should have that information available. We can help support this if you're having difficulty reaching out to them. If you are on a private well, where you live might influence the chance for the groundwater to be contaminated, but we can provide resources for how you can have that tested. If you do have concerns and you want to put a filter in your home, there are a number of water filters that are effective at removing PFAS, and we do have a fact sheet that's available on our website related to this information. They do vary in their ability to effectively remove PFAS, but the point is any filter will help remove some of the PFAS. Even a pitcher filter like a Brita will remove PFAS, or the filters on your refrigerator. You can go to more advanced systems that you might be able to install under your sink, like a 2-stage filter or a reverse osmosis filter. Those do get pricier, but any filter will help. Outside of the drinking water, you can check to see if the AFFF used in your department does contain PFAS. If it does, maybe talk to your chief about the possibility of switching to non-PFAS options. And I will mention that there is a take-back program that's ongoing here in the state of North Carolina. And I imagine most departments are already familiar with that. If not, please let us know and we'll put you in touch with that program. It's also important to store your turnout gear separate from living areas. And I think most departments are already on top of this and do this pretty well. And again, we just want to, and you've probably heard this many times, we just recommend performing on-scene decon with a soap, brush, and water. There is some data coming out of the University of Arizona that suggests serum PFAS levels are lower in individual firefighters that wash their gear more frequently. So this might be another effective way to reduce your exposure. So just really quickly, what we're doing next, our study is continuing to recruit firefighters across the state. I think we have like 9 or 10 more events scheduled throughout this summer. We're going to continue to measure and assess PFAS in North Carolina firefighters. In the future, we hope to be able to provide data on exposures to other chemicals as well, particularly combustion byproducts, metals, and flame retardant chemicals. And we're going to start implementing the use of wristbands as an exposure tool to help monitor exposures that are ongoing during your work shifts. These will provide information on how exposures might differ when you respond to a vehicle fire versus a structural fire, or during different training activities that hopefully could also be useful for, again, identifying strategies to mitigate your exposure to some of these chemicals. So with that, I've reached the end. I really want to thank, obviously, the collaboratory for providing this funding, the Duke Cancer Institute, the Annie and Michael Falk Foundation. And I particularly want to thank Kate, Candy, Eve, and Alex. They have been the ones that have been coming to these stations to support the recruitment events. Without their efforts and support, none of this could happen. Our other partners, and I particularly want to thank the fire service partners that we have in particular. So with that, we've reached the end of this overview, and we're going to open it up for questions. I'm going to just for a few minutes leave this screen up here because this has the QR code for our website, and it also has our email address and our phone number if individuals aren't comfortable asking questions here, but they'd like to follow up with us at a later time. So please do avail yourself of those resources. So with that, I think we will open it up for questions. As Eve indicated, please feel free to type some questions into the chat. I know we did receive one question prior to the presentation this morning. Let me stop sharing these slides and I will come back here. Okay. I think the first question, well, let me read out the question I know that we received prior to this morning. So I know we received a question about whether blood donation is an effective strategy for reducing your PFAS exposure levels. And I will put, so there was one study conducted in Australia in 2019. It would certainly be helpful if this was repeated again, but based on what we know from that one study, they compared blood donation and plasma donation and reducing PFAS levels over a 1-year time frame. And what they found is that plasma donation did lead to a significant reduction over the year in PFAS levels. It was about 30% reduction on average over a year. But that's when those individuals donated plasma every 6 weeks for an entire year. And that was in comparison to individuals that donated blood every 12 weeks over a year. So blood donation led to a very small reduction, about 10% for some PFAS, not at all, others stayed constant, whereas plasma donation did result in a 30% reduction. But that was a lot of plasma donations. So just keep in mind that if this is something you're interested in, it just would take frequent donations to actually lead to a reduction. Unfortunately, these chemicals do stick around in our body for a long time. They actually bind to proteins in our blood, and they can be in our body for years before they're actually excreted or broken down. So hopefully that provides a response to that question. But Candy, I think some other questions have come in.
And one of the questions was, could we share the upcoming events for firefighters to participate? And we are happy to share that. If you want that information, if you could email us at nc.ffccs@duke.edu, or just give us a call that I've got listed in the chat here so that I can send it directly to you. The next question is, do we know what the PFAS elements are in the PFHXS in which North Carolina is higher?
Right. So I'll just point out again, we see higher levels on average compared, just going back to PFHXS. So that's one PFAS that seems to be higher compared to the data from NHANES that was collected in 2018. What we need to do is compare those measurements to individuals living in North Carolina that had their blood tested in the last 2 years to determine if that is really high or if that's just a function of, being exposed to the drinking water that's here in North Carolina, for example. So I can't say definitively that that's higher in just firefighters until we compare it to some other populations here in North Carolina. Now, PFHXS is a PFAS that has been used in AFFF. So it is possible that some of that exposure is coming from AFFF, but we cannot say that with absolute certainty. But as I said, we're hoping to kind of follow this up, make some more comparisons to understand how different PFH excess levels are in North Carolina firefighters compared to just the North Carolina population in general. So hopefully we'll have some more information on that in the next few months. Have there been other questions, Candy, that came in?
So I don't know if you saw this one, but someone put in, my level of PFHXA is above the 95th. What types of things would cause this?
Okay. So PFHXA can come from a variety of sources. So we can't say with absolute certainty where that exposure occurred. It is a component in some of the stain repellent treatments that are out there. It is found in some paints and varnishes. It's also it's going to get complicated, but PFHXA is a breakdown product of other PFAS. So for example, there are some of the PFAS that are used in turnout gear can break down and form PFHXA. I can't say for certainty that that's where that one came from, but it is a possibility. But there are multiple sources. So it gets very difficult, unfortunately, trying to understand where these exposures come from, which is why I said, reducing exposure where you can is important. Drinking water being one of the main ones where we have some control and can do this. Outside that, I can't really provide any avenues. And this is a reason why moving forward, we're hoping to use the wristbands as a monitor to understand potential exposures in our ambient environment. And that might help us pinpoint other sources of exposure because we can detect PFAS on the wristbands in addition to other combustion byproducts and flame retardants and other industrial chemicals. So I'm sorry I cannot provide any more information on that, but it's going to be unfortunately impossible to tell where it's coming from. Any other questions?
Here's another. Is there a chart anywhere that can show us where the different exposures might come from, understanding that you don't know definitively?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's another really great question. This is really what I hope to be able to support moving forward, because in my mind, right, if you want to reduce exposure, you need to know where the most of your exposure is coming from. And this has been a big gap in the field for years now. There's been a huge focus on drinking water because several studies clearly show that drinking water is a big exposure source, but all those studies have been done in the general population. So in the general population, drinking water seems to explain 90 to 95% of most PFAS. There is one PFAS that was not abundant in any of the firefighters, which we know comes from indoor air and likely paints and upholsteries and sealants. That's a PFAS called N-methylphosa. So some of them we can be exposed to them through inhalation, potentially dermal contact. Now in the firefighters, I think some of these exposures could be different, right? We don't have a good sense of how much exposure is coming from AFFF. We don't actually know if any exposures are coming from the turnout gear. And I know we're pivoting to non-PFAS treated turnout gear, but we just have no idea how much of the exposure is coming from that use of turnout gear historically over the past 20 years. But as I said, moving forward, I'm hoping we can support some research to try to answer those questions and understand what the primary sources of exposures are. No additional questions. We will plan to close our town hall today. Hopefully you have our contact information. If you do think of something in the future, please feel free to reach out to us via email or phone. We're happy to address any questions. I just want to say thank you again for participating in this study. I really hope this was useful to you. And we hope to have some more town halls in the future to update you as we move forward in this project and collect new information. So thanks everybody, and have a great day.